A brittle wind swept down from the higher peaks, carrying fragments of ice and the earthy musk of pine. The small clearing in which the chapel stood was perpetually drenched in half-shadow, as if the sun's beams dared not linger on the worn stones and blackened wood. Locals in the valley below whispered that the building was alive, cursed or haunted by an ancient sorrow. The roughly hewn door, crowned by a crumbling arch, bore scratches and dents that could not be explained by mere weather. Towering pines on either side of the chapel creaked ominously as the wind wove between their boughs, seeming to groan in sympathy with the ancient structure's secrets. Jeremiah Dunn was no stranger to the arcane. A scholar of antiquated religions, he had come with the intention of researching the chapel's rumored history of stained glass windows. He had heard barroom tales of how the images inside would shift in the moonlight, rearranging themselves to display scenes not originally intended by the artisans who made them centuries ago. Most people laughed or shrugged at such an idea. Glass was lifeless after all. But Jeremiah had studied enough hidden corners of the world to know that behind legends often lay a measure of truth, and so he braced himself against the biting cold, pushing open the heavy door to see if the rumors held weight. Inside, the damp chill pressed upon him. The place smelled of dust and ancient candle wax, layered over by an indefinable, stale odor that hinted at old rot. Rows of pews lined the interior on either side of a narrow aisle, each plank of wood bleached gray and chewed away by the centuries. At the far end of the aisle stood a modest altar, and behind it rose the large stained-glass window, the chapel's crowning glory. Jeremiah's breath nearly stalled when he finally laid eyes on it. It was unlike anything he had seen before. A kaleidoscope of color that depicted scenes from Scripture, but with jarring twists. The panels, though partially caked with grime, radiated swirling patterns of blues, reds, and gold. The eye was drawn immediately to a central image that seemed to show a robed figure, carved from the glass so intricately that one would swear the drapes of the cloak were in motion. On closer inspection, Jeremiah noted strange details. Where one might expect a halo around the figure's head, there was only a barbed circle. Where a pastoral background of hills might normally appear, there was instead a swirling dark vortex. He took a wavering step forward. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows in their frames, making them tremble as if alive. For the faintest moment, he could have sworn the robed figure's arm shifted. He blinked, dismissing it as imagination. Yet a sense of unease rooted him to the spot. He thought of the tales he'd heard, that in certain moonlit hours the glass rearranged itself under the gaze of the full moon, and that whatever scenes formed were omens of who would be the next to vanish in the mountain's darkness. A rustling behind him broke the reverie. Jeremiah whirled, heart pounding, to see a woman peering at him from behind a pew. She was cloaked in a threadbare shawl, her boots caked with mud and dried pine needles. Despite her trembling figure, her voice was steady. "Stranger, are you here to see it too?" Jeremiah gathered himself, forcing a polite smile. "I've heard stories, yes. I came to study the craftsmanship, the phenomenon." The woman nodded, gesturing at the bowing timbers. "I am Miriam. This place, it's not safe, especially at night. Yet I linger. My brother went missing 3 nights past, and I think it showed him on the glass." His pulse quickened at her words. "Showed him?" "Yes." Her gaze traveled to the luminous rose window that adorned the back wall above the altar. "He used to hike these mountains. One night, we snuck in here to escape a sudden storm. We lit a candle to see, and I looked up at the glass. The figure in the center was no longer some saint or prophet. It had taken the form of my brother. A day later, he vanished." She clasped her hands, knuckles whitening. "I have not told the authorities. They would think me mad." Jeremiah knew all too well how superstitions could be dismissed, but a prickling dread convinced him that she might be telling the truth. "Have you witnessed it change shapes yourself?" She nodded. "At night, especially under the fullness of the moon. I have seen the faces on the glass warp, as though it thirsted for something new. People vanish. Afterward, he paused, running a hand through his short, unkempt hair. He thought of the countless cryptic references hidden in old books of demonology and unholy rites. "Something lingers here," he whispered, "and it uses that window as an instrument to mark its victims." Miriam glanced behind her, as if uncertain whether they were alone. "I don't know what it wants, but more than one villager has disappeared. They call it the lurker in the pines. I tried to warn them, but they claim we were cursed for prying into the chapel's secrets." Jeremiah felt an obligation to help. Could it be that the window is possessed by some malignant force? Or is it the entire chapel? Miriam shook her head. "No one can say, but the caretaker. He might know. He's old. He's lived in these mountains longer than anyone. They say he sleeps in a room behind the altar. He forgets things, but he might remember some details about the original glassmaker. They found the caretaker, a silver-haired old man named Roderick, lurking behind a thick curtain near the altar. Emaciated and bent, he seemed half lost in his own mind. Yet when they mentioned the chapel's windows, his eyes cleared somewhat, like clouds parting for the faint sunshine. With trembling fingers, he clutched a tattered prayer book to his chest. "Long ago," he rasped, "the chapel was built by a sect that believed in prophecy through visions. They installed that stained glass window thinking it would reveal holy truths. But the glass was cursed. It did not show the righteous path. It showed whose blood was demanded next." He closed his eyes, as if recalling a terrible memory. "They sacrificed innocents to appease the entity dwelling in the mountains." A hush enveloped them. Jeremiah and Miriam exchanged uneasy glances. The caretaker continued, "They believed that by feeding its souls, they would keep the valley safe from plague, famine, or storms. In time, those worshippers died out or fled, but the mountain's presence remained, and the glass, it still throbs with that evil." Jeremiah exhaled shakily, a swirl of half-formed theories stirring in his mind. He had read about cults that used artifacts, mirrors, statues, or relics to channel supernatural energies. A window capable of showing the next victim was an especially insidious tool. "Is there a way to break the curse?" he asked. Roderick's head sank. "It must be shattered at the precise moment it reveals the next victim. But it is not as simple as taking a hammer to it. The glass can only be destroyed by a blade forged from a meteorite that fell on this mountain centuries ago. That meteoric steel is rumored to cut through curses as easily as flesh. You'll have to find the dagger known as the Sky Shard Blade." A surge of determination lit Jeremiah's eyes. "Do you know where it might be?" The caretaker's expression clouded. "Once, it belonged to a devout man who vowed to end the evil. He died before it could be done. They buried him in a crypt within the chapel's catacombs." He lifted a bony finger, pointing to a rotted stairway near the side of the altar, descending into darkness. "If you dare, search the catacombs. But hurry, the glass grows more active when the moon is full, and tomorrow night is the height of it." Jeremiah turned to Miriam, who gave a resolute nod. Together they descended the precarious steps into the chapel's underbelly, each carrying a candle that guttered in the drafts. The catacombs were dank and silent. Unseen water dripped unseen places, and their footfalls echoed as if entering a tomb of giants. The walls were lined with faded etchings, angels with wings outspread, and eyes of black circles, or robed figures bowing before an ominous shape. Each crypt nook contained skeletal remains, some with disintegrating tomb markers. With each step, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread pressed heavily upon them. They finally came to a sealed door, carved with archaic symbols. Jeremiah traced a fingertip over the pattern, a downward-pointing star encircled by cryptic script. He and Miriam both leaned their shoulders against it, pushing until, with a groaning protest, the stone door slid inward. Beyond lay a round chamber with a low vaulted ceiling. At the center rested a massive sarcophagus. On its lid were carved scenes of a man in clerical robes fighting a monstrous silhouette. By the faint candlelight, the inscription read, "Here lies Father Albrecht, sworn to end the mountain's evil. May the final day see him rise victorious." Jeremiah set his candle on the lid and pulled from his coat pocket a small chisel. With Miriam's help, they pried the stone lid inch by inch until there was enough space to peer inside. The musty scent of centuries wafted upward, a mixture of mold and something acrid. Atop the skeletal remains lay a tarnished silver dagger. Even in the minimal light, it gave off a faint gleam that felt different from simple metal. He carefully lifted the blade, a wave of prickly energy sliding up his arm. The handle was engraved with meteoric symbols, and the tip, though dulled by time, still exuded a lethal promise. Whispering a silent reverence for the occupant's quest, Jeremiah tucked the blade into his coat. When they replaced the lid, a sudden noise tore through the silence. A scuttling, like nails scraping over stone. Their candles flickered, threatening to go out. Miriam clutched Jeremiah's shoulder as they spun toward the door. Something, or someone, lurked just beyond the threshold. They crept to the doorway, hearts fiercely pounding. A rusted suit of armor lay along one wall, its gauntlets scattered, but no living presence could be seen. They continued their return in tense silence, the scrape of their feet on the damp floor magnified by the surrounding darkness. Every shadow seemed to shift, forming shapes that vanished when approached. Relief flooded them the moment they spied the staircase leading back up to the chapel. Emerging into the main hall, they found Roderick slumped at the front pew in a twilight doze. Miriam gently shook him awake. At the sight of the blade, the caretaker grimaced as though pained. "Keep it close," he whispered. "Tonight is a prelude to the full moon. The window might manifest an image of the next victim before then, and if you see your face depicted, do not run. It will only make the lurker's hunt more savage." As night fell, Jeremiah and Miriam huddled near the old altar, lighting a series of candles to keep the darkness at bay. The stained glass window loomed above them, eerily still in the flickering light. Yet, as midnight approached, shapes within the mosaic began to distort. At first it seemed a mere trick of the candle's reflection, but soon the figures in the glass flickered and rearranged themselves like living puzzle pieces. The robed central figure's face twisted, morphing from a hollow-eyed saint to something that almost resembled Miriam's features. Then Jeremiah's. Miriam's breath caught. "It just showed my face, didn't it?" Jeremiah moved to stand in front of her. "It happened so fast. It might have been neither of us." But he did not sound certain, and she gave him a sharp, worried stare. Light danced and glowed across the kaleidoscopic panes. Colors ran like living water across the surface, forming a new tableau. The chapel's interior, with a solitary figure kneeling at the altar. Jeremiah and Miriam both recognized the figure's cloak. It was Roderick, the caretaker. The depiction was heartbreakingly detailed. Roderick's hunched shoulders, the threadbare vestments he wore. Then something else oozed into view, a tall black shape unraveling from the background, stretching out a twisted arm toward the kneeling caretaker. The glass illuminated the shape's claw-like fingers, a blackness that overtook the caretaker's figure in a swirl of crimson. Jeremiah exclaimed, "It's showing Roderick!" He looked around in alarm, scanning for the caretaker. Miriam gasped and clutched his arm. "He was asleep in the pew. We have to find him, warn him." They leapt from their vantage point, skirting the pews. But Roderick was nowhere to be seen. The large oak door at the entrance stood ajar, letting in a sliver of moonlight. With dread in their hearts, they hurried outside, where the cold mountain air stung their faces. The moon glowed huge and pale over the jagged peaks, illuminating the chapel's exterior and the pines like silent sentinels. Rustling footsteps in the underbrush drew them down a narrow path around the chapel. Sure enough, they soon glimpsed Roderick, stumbling through the darkness, drawn by some unseen call. "Roderick!" Miriam shouted. "Come back!" But he did not seem to hear her. He pressed forward, weaving between pine trunks into the star-dappled gloom. Jeremiah tightened his grip on the meteoric dagger, forging ahead. Clouds drifted across the moon, briefly plunging the forest into deeper darkness. Tree boughs groaned overhead when a wind gusted, and the silhouettes of the pines seemed to shift. The murmur of something unnatural rose on the breeze, a distant, hollow moan that set Jeremiah's teeth on edge. At last, they found Roderick in a small clearing behind the chapel. He stood, swaying on his feet, as though in a trance. His eyes were fixed on a ragged hole in the ground, a collapsed portion of hillside. From it emanated a low, throbbing airflow that smelled of decay. Before Jeremiah could shout a warning, the caretaker lurched forward. A flicker of movement in the hole made Miriam cry out. Two gleaming pinpoints like eyes stared back from the gloom. Jeremiah rushed to Roderick, seizing an arm to haul him away. But a sudden force struck him, as if thrown by invisible hands. He tumbled backward, barely managing to keep hold of the dagger. A tall shape began to emerge from the pit. It was taller than any man, its limbs elongated. It had the suggestion of a face. A swirling black mass with pinpricks of red glinting where eyes should be. Miriam covered her mouth in horror. She recognized the shape from the stained glass. The lurker in the pines had come. The caretaker stood immobile, tears streaming down his face, mixed with an eerie, calm acceptance. The entity's arm, if one could call it that, stretched outward, and Jeremiah felt a pulse in the night air, as if the creature were summoning ancient strength. As its claws closed around Roderick's body, a keening wail erupted from the old man. Without hesitation, Jeremiah sprang forward, brandishing the meteoric dagger, heart pounding like a war drum. He slashed at the creature's arm. Where the blade struck, an otherworldly shriek echoed through the forest. A black fluid that was not blood splattered on the ground. The lurker recoiled. Miriam lunged to pull Roderick free, but the caretaker sagged, lifeless and limp. Still in the creature's partial grip, her frantic attempts to rescue him were in vain. He was already gone, eyes blank, mouth agape. With a roar of rage and grief, Jeremiah dove in again, driving the dagger deeper into the spectral limb. The creature hissed, twisting to avoid further blows. Its movements were liquid and unnatural, as though it could warp its form at will. In one fluid motion, the lurker released Roderick's corpse and swatted Jeremiah aside, sending him crashing into the pine needles a few steps away. Pain jolted through him, but he forced himself upright, ignoring the taste of blood in his mouth. He caught sight of Miriam, who was half lifting Roderick's body. The caretaker's heart no longer beat, but she clung to him, tears streaking her face. The lurker advanced, looming closer, spidery limbs bending at unnatural angles. With difficulty, Jeremiah planted his feet. "We have to destroy the window," he yelled, his voice hoarse. "The caretaker is lost, but we can end this monstrous cycle." Miriam gently lowered the old man to the ground, her eyes red-rimmed with sorrow. She joined Jeremiah, and they retreated toward the chapel's rear entrance, the lurker slithering behind them in methodical pursuit. Jeremiah's knuckles whitened on the hilt of the dagger. He knew the caretaker's warning. The window must be shattered at the precise moment it predicts its next victim. They had all seen Roderick's image. Perhaps that prophecy was fulfilled now, but if the glass still hungered for more, it would shift again soon. They burst through a side door into the chapel's dim interior. The candles had burned low, casting long tongues of shadow across the floor. The stained glass window shuddered and pulsed as if in anticipation, as though it sensed the lurker's presence. Jeremiah looked at Miriam. "When it shows the new image, that's our chance." She nodded, sucking in a shaky breath. Outside, there was a rustle of the wind in the pines. No sign of the lurker yet. Jeremiah gripped the dagger, adrenaline singing through his veins. The window's colors flared, swirling in chaotic patterns, until they coalesced into a horrifying new depiction. The chapel interior once more, But this time, the figure kneeling at the altar was Miriam. Jeremiah's heart surged in his chest. The swirling figure behind her in the depiction was the robed form from before. A chilling truth sank into him. The glass had named Miriam as the next sacrifice. Miriam's eyes widened. "Then let it be now," she whispered. "We must break it." Jeremiah rushed to the altar, poised before the stained glass. He could sense an aura of malice emanating from the window, the centuries-old hunger that had claimed so many lives. Just as he lifted the dagger, the main door slammed open. The lurker, tall and writhing, poured into the chapel like living shadow, moving with an unnatural grace between the pews. Its ragged breathing whistled across the silent hall, echoing against the stone pillars. Jeremiah's nerves screamed for him to defend Miriam, but he had to trust that the only real defense was destroying the cursed glass. He braced himself, took careful aim at the center of the swirling image, where Miriam's depicted face glowed in the glass's mosaic. With all his might, he drove the meteoric dagger against the window. There was a jarring, earth-shaking clang. The glass did not shatter as easily as anticipated. Cracks radiated from the point of impact, spider-webbing outward with an iridescent shimmer. The chapel walls trembled as if in protest. Behind Jeremiah, the lurker was nearly upon them, black talons raised to strike. Miriam, heart-pounding, snatched a broken piece of pew and swung at the creature's trunk-like arm. It gave a startled hiss, rearing back, but it was only momentarily deterred. Jeremiah raised the dagger again and stabbed once more at the window. This time, trembling cracks multiplied voraciously. The entire stained glass surface began to pulse with a mesmerizing brilliance. The lurker emitted an ear-splitting shriek that rattled the pews, as if feeling its bond to the window threatened. It lunged at Jeremiah, but Miriam hurled herself into its path, gritting her teeth as the creature's limbs tangled around her. Old nightmares came to life in her mind, but she clung to the monstrous form, giving Jeremiah precious moments. With a last cry, Jeremiah plunged the dagger into the very center of the swirling cracks. The window exploded in a hail of shards, releasing a wave of unseen force that knocked everyone to the ground. A cacophony of snapping glass reverberated off the stone, and for an instant, the chapel was filled with a shimmering aura of chaotic light. Miriam screamed, the lurker howled in furious despair, and Jeremiah cast his arms over his head to shield himself from the glass fragments peppering the air. When the storm of splinters subsided, the thick silence hurt. Jeremiah struggled to breathe, rising slowly to his knees on a bed of cracked glass shards. Panic flared in his chest. Had the beast killed Miriam? But then he spotted her nearby, battered and shaking, still conscious. She coughed, raising her gaze toward the lurker's form. The creature stood hunched near the altar, its silhouette flickering like a dying candle flame. The red pinpoints in its face flared once, flickered, and then died out with a final, anguished cry. The hateful shape oozed downward, a formless darkness dissolving into the gloom. In moments, nothing remained but a faint stain of shadow on the worn floor. For a long minute, neither Jeremiah nor Miriam spoke. They listened to the lonely wind moaning through the broken stained glass frames. Finally, Miriam let out a ragged breath. "Is it gone?" Jeremiah nodded. "I think so. Its tether was the glass. Now that it's destroyed..." His words trailed off as he thought of the caretaker. They had not managed to save him, but they had broken the centuries-old cycle that would have claimed countless more. A leaden sorrow settled in Jeremiah's bones as he realized that the caretaker's unexpected sacrifice had paved the way for them to act in time. They rose slowly, surveying the ruined stained glass around them. Moonlight poured through the jagged gaps, illuminating the chapel with a new, austere honesty. The swirling pictures were gone. All that remained was shattered color, brilliant even in destruction. In the new hush, the building seemed lighter, free of the malignant breath that had once clung to every surface. Miriam's voice trembled. "What happens now?" Jeremiah looked at the mountainous silhouette beyond the broken windows. "We bury Roderick properly. We return the dagger to its rightful resting place." His voice softened. "And we tell the story. People should know of the danger that once dwelled here, so no new evil will ever awaken in this place." She nodded, wiping at tears. The memory of her brother's face flashed in her mind. While it did not bring back her lost sibling, at least she had found some kind of resolution. She and Jeremiah made their way out the side door, stepping into the clearing where Roderick's body still lay. Gently they carried him back into the chapel, mindful of the shards that now littered the floor. A hush settled over the pews, solemn as a funeral march. Working by the faint moonlight, they laid the caretaker's body near the altar, where he had long served. As dawn approached, gold and pink light filtered through the broken frames, and Jeremiah glimpsed a peaceful look upon Roderick's lined face, as if some final relief had freed him from the chapel's grim legacy. The caretaker, perhaps, had found some measure of redemption, even in death. In the days that followed, they performed a humble burial for him in the chapel's cemetery, placing a small wooden marker over the grave. The villagers, gradually discovering what had transpired, arrived in hesitant trickles to see the shattered window. Shock mingled with an unspoken gratitude. The sense of dread that had hung over the region began to lift. Rumor spread that the vile illusions had been laid to rest, and that no more ominous shapes haunted the night. Some still muttered that Jeremiah and Miriam were meddlers who had shattered a piece of their heritage, but most recognized the shattered glass as proof that the old horrors had finally been conquered. Miriam decided to remain for a while in a small cabin near the chapel, tending to the caretaker's tasks until the building could be fully deconsecrated or repurposed. She felt a duty to ensure no shadows still lurked behind the altar or in the catacombs below. Jeremiah, weary but resolute, continued his research, documenting every detail of their harrowing ordeal. He made sketches of the window before its destruction, the swirling colors, and the monstrous shape that had tried to claim them. Those sketches, he resolved, would serve as a warning for future generations seeking knowledge of the supernatural. Evil, he had learned, persisted not just in dusty tomes or cryptic legends. It lived in neglected corners of the world, feeding on fear and reverence, waiting for those who dared glimpse its hidden face. Late one afternoon, as they finished clearing rubble, Miriam paused, pressing her hand to the stone wall where the window had once stood. Only the twisted lead frame and ragged edges remained, forming an incomplete mosaic of color. A gentle breeze passed, stirring dust motes in the air. She closed her eyes, recalling the final, shattering blow of the dagger. Then she imagined her brother's face, smiling in gratitude, free from the mosaic's curse. Jeremiah joined her, resting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "The glass can no longer claim another victim," he said quietly. "Your brother's disappearance is avenged." She let out a trembling sigh, and Roderick's sacrifice won't be in vain. Her gaze flicked upward to the high, broken arch through which the fading sun cast a warm, natural light into the once dreary interior. She looked at Jeremiah, a subtle resolve brightening her features. Let there be no more secrets here. Let people see the truth. They left the chapel doors open wide, allowing the clear air and soft daylight to flood the halls. A far cry from the hush of menace that once clung to those stones, the building now stood open to the elements, a memorial to courage rather than a looming vestige of evil. The shattered stained glass glittered underfoot each time they crossed the space, shifting in the sun as though dancing in gratitude for its own release. At dusk, they lit a single lantern and set it on the altar, not as an offering to dark forces, but as a humble beacon of remembrance for those lost. Roderick, Miriam's brother, and all the unnamed victims the glass had claimed over the centuries. Neither Jeremiah nor Miriam spoke. They simply let the silence cradle the memory of the dead. Now the chapel could breathe again. Outside, the pine trees rustled in a gentle wind, no longer foreboding but serene. The yawning mountains stood as steadfast witnesses, their slopes cast in the violet glow of twilight. Tomorrow, Jeremiah would begin his journey down to the valley to share his findings. Perhaps the church would send a bishop or some scholars to further consecrate the land. Perhaps the entire building would be dismantled, or maybe converted into a place of honest worship that would overshadow its grim past. Whatever the future held, the wicked tapestry of illusions had been torn apart, and the lurker in the pines was gone, banished alongside the curses, bound to the sparkling shards. A new dawn would rise over the chapel, no longer an omen of doom, but a testament to what could be overcome when courage and resolve faced down centuries of dread.